As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the landscape, a chill hung in the air, one that felt heavy with unspoken truths. It was here, in this eerie twilight, that I first crossed the threshold into a world shrouded in darkness, a world where spiritual chaos lurked just beyond the veil of the ordinary. I remember the moment vividly. I was drawn in by the allure of power, the whispers in the dark promising insight and control over my life. It began innocently enough, with curiosity leading me to delve into ancient texts and rituals, enticed by the idea that I could harness forces beyond comprehension. But soon, I realized that the pursuit of such power came with a steep price, one I was woefully unprepared to pay. At first, everything felt exhilarating. The rituals, the chants, the gatherings with others who had chosen a similar path, they all felt intoxicating. I was mesmerized by the promise of knowledge that could alter the very essence of my existence. But as I immersed myself deeper, the glamour faded, replaced by an unsettling reality. The chaos that followed was not merely a consequence of my choices. It was an invitation to dark forces that had only just begun to encroach upon my life. My relationships began to unravel. Friends who once stood by my side slowly drifted away, their faces etched with confusion and concern. I could feel the spiritual weight pressing down on my chest, yet I dismissed it as mere coincidence, a side effect of the stress I blamed on external factors. I was unaware that these fractures were the initial manifestations of something far more sinister, a spiritual attack that thrived on my ignorance. In quiet moments, I would catch glimpses of the strange, swirling energy around me. Nightmares invaded my sleep, vivid dreams depicting battles between light and darkness. There was a haunting sense of foreboding that enveloped me, but I brushed it off as the product of an overactive imagination. Little did I know that these signs were not mere figments of my thoughts. They were warnings, subtle yet potent indicators that something was gravely amiss. I began to experience a series of odd occurrences that left me questioning my sanity. Objects would move inexplicably, shadows flickered at the periphery of my vision, and a sense of impending doom loomed over my every decision. Each day felt like I was spiraling deeper into an abyss, yet I remained unaware of the forces at play. It was during this time of chaos that I felt the first stirrings of doubt. My journey into the darkness had become riddled with fear, a fear I hadn't anticipated. The dark practices that had once empowered me now felt like shackles binding me to a fate I could scarcely comprehend. As I stood on the precipice of my own destruction, the whispers of self-reflection began to emerge. Questions flooded my mind. What had I done? How had I allowed myself to be seduced by such dark promises? This internal conflict marked the beginning of my transformation. I started to recognize the gravity of my choices, the ramifications of engaging with forces that sought to manipulate and control. More than just a fleeting feeling, my life had descended into a battlefield where the enemy was hidden in plain sight. Yet, even then, I struggled with the truth. The chaos in my life was a mere reflection of the deeper, invisible forces at work. It was as if I were a pawn on a chessboard, oblivious to the intricate game being played around me. The realization that I was under spiritual attack was a slow dawning, a flicker of light in a world that had become overwhelmingly dark. With each passing day, the grip of confusion tightened. I found myself grappling with a relentless cycle of despair, despite my hunger for clarity. The more I sought answers, the more elusive they became. I was caught in a web of my own making, and the implications of my actions were no longer limited to myself alone. I began to understand that spiritual attacks often begin subtly, unnoticed by the individual. A creeping malaise disguised as everyday struggles. As I navigated through the chaos, it became clear that I wasn't the only one ensnared in this web. I encountered others who, like me, had danced on the edge of darkness and were now awakening to the truth of their experiences. Each story echoed a familiar refrain. The inexplicable burdens, the haunting dreams, the isolation that followed a descent into practices shunned by the very fabric of light. Through shared conversations, I learned that the signs I had once dismissed were common threads woven into the tapestry of spiritual awakening. The weight of ignorance had forced me into a corner, but now, in the company of others, I discovered the strength in vulnerability. We shared our struggles, our triumphs, and the burgeoning realization that darkness thrives in isolation, but diminishes in the light of truth. At this pivotal juncture, I understood that the chaos surrounding me was not merely a personal struggle. It was part of a larger pattern, an orchestration of forces that thrived on my disconnection from clarity and purpose. It became evident that recognizing these spiritual attacks was the first step in reclaiming my life from the shadows that sought to consume it. This initial chaos served as a prelude to the deeper revelations that awaited me. Each moment of clarity sliced through the mist of confusion, hinting at the invisible causes of the turmoil I had endured. The journey to understanding was just beginning, and the promise of liberation awaited on the horizon. As I stood at the threshold of this realization, I sensed a shift, one that would ultimately lead me closer to the truth of my existence and the power that lay within. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, yet I could feel the stirrings of hope rekindling within me, a flicker of light amidst the shadows. Little did I know, the lessons learned from this chaos would lay the foundation for my future understanding of spiritual resilience and empowerment. As I closed my eyes to reflect, one thought resonated clearer than ever. The battle against spiritual attacks is not fought only with knowledge, but with the courage to confront the darkness within and without. The revelations that followed would delve deeper into understanding the nature of these attacks, exploring the subtlety of their beginnings. And just as I began to grasp the intricacies of my past mistakes, the stage was set for a journey of awakening that would transform my life utterly and irrevocably. The realization that I was under spiritual attack was just the beginning. As I began to peel back the layers of my experience, a chilling truth emerged. My ignorance about my own emotional vulnerabilities had opened the door to these insidious forces. It was a revelation that struck deep, resonating with the weight of 1,000 truths. I had unwittingly provided a pathway for darkness to infiltrate my life through emotional cracks I hadn't even known existed. In the weeks that followed, I embarked on a journey of introspection, delving into the emotional turmoil that had become my everyday reality. I began to recall moments of weakness, times when I had felt overwhelmed, anxious, or simply lost. Those feelings, which I had brushed aside as trivial or fleeting, were the very openings through which spiritual attacks thrived. I understood now that emotions are not just fleeting experiences, they are gateways, each one a potential entry point for chaos to seep into our lives. I recalled a particular incident that had occurred during a particularly tumultuous period. I had lost a job, and with it, a significant part of my identity. The despair that followed was palpable, a heavy fog that clouded my thoughts and emotions. I sought solace in distractions, late nights, mindless television, and even more insidious practices. Instead of confronting the emotional pain, I ignored it, hoping it would simply dissipate. I had no idea that each moment of neglect was a call to the darkness, an invitation for spiritual attacks to gain a foothold in my life. As I pondered these experiences, I recognized a pattern. Many people, perhaps even those close to me, often overlook the impact of their emotional states. We live in a society that encourages the suppression of feelings, urging us to stay strong and keep moving forward. But in doing so, we leave ourselves vulnerable, unwittingly inviting chaos into our lives. I realized that my emotional turbulence was not an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of a larger issue that affected many, if not most, of us. This understanding prompted me to reflect on conversations I had shared with friends. Often, they would dismiss their own feelings of anxiety or sadness, attributing them to stress from work or personal life. "It's just a tough time," they would say, brushing off their emotional struggles as temporary. Yet here I was, having felt the very consequences of that attitude. Ignoring emotional vulnerabilities was akin to walking through a minefield, blindfolded, unaware of the dangers lurking just beneath the surface. As I continued to unravel the connection between emotions and spiritual attacks, I began to confront my own feelings more openly. No longer would I allow myself to be swept away by the current of despair. Instead, I learned to acknowledge my emotions, to sit with them, and to understand their origins. It was a painful yet necessary process, confronting the shadows I had long avoided. I began to practice mindfulness, a tool that offered clarity in the midst of confusion. I would take quiet moments to breathe deeply, allowing myself to feel whatever emotions surfaced without judgment. In those moments, I would visualize the dark energy that had once surrounded me, and I would assert my authority over it. My declaration was simple: "You have no power here." Each time I uttered those words, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control of my own narrative. This newfound clarity also sparked a desire to educate others about the significance of their emotional health. I became determined to share my story, hoping to shed light on the dangers of ignorance. I envisioned discussions centered around emotional awareness and spiritual well-being, creating a community where individuals could share their experiences without fear of judgment. It was not just about my journey, it was about empowering others to reclaim their lives from the clutches of chaos. Yet amidst this growth, I recognized a deeper truth. The emotional vulnerabilities I had finally acknowledged were not the only factors at play. There was something more insidious, something that often went unnoticed until it was too late. I felt a sense of urgency to understand why spiritual attacks often remain undetected, why so many people fail to recognize the signs until they've already succumbed to the chaos. As I delved deeper into this exploration, I encountered stories from others who had faced similar battles. Many spoke of feeling an inexplicable heaviness, a weight that seemed to materialize without cause. Others described moments of intense fear or anxiety that appeared out of nowhere, leaving them grappling for explanation. The common thread among these experiences was a profound lack of understanding of what was truly happening beneath the surface. This sense of urgency propelled me forward. I began to investigate the patterns that accompanied spiritual attacks, seeking to connect the dots. I discovered that the enemy often thrived in obscurity, operating in the shadows of ignorance. It preyed upon those who were unaware of their emotional states, capitalizing on their vulnerabilities to launch attacks that left them disoriented and confused. I felt a deep responsibility to unravel these mysteries for myself and for others. It wasn't enough to merely recognize the emotional connection. I needed to understand how to guard against these subtle forms of attack. The journey was becoming increasingly clear. Knowledge was power, and the more I understood, the more I could fortify myself against the encroaching darkness. As I reached this pivotal moment of clarity, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope. The chaos that had once engulfed my life was now the catalyst for transformation. I had crossed a threshold, a point of no return where ignorance would no longer dictate my reality. I understood my emotional landscape, and in doing so, I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life from the grips of spiritual chaos. Yet, the path ahead remained fraught with challenges. I was acutely aware that the journey was far from over. With each revelation came the responsibility to act and to share my newfound understanding with others. This awareness ignited a fire within me, propelling me toward the next phase of my journey, a quest to uncover why so many remain oblivious to the very attacks that sought to undermine their lives. In that moment of realization, I knew that sharing this vital information was not just an option, it was imperative. It was time to shed light on the darkness and empower others to recognize the signs of spiritual attacks before they spiraled into chaos. The urgency was palpable, and I was ready to delve deeper into the heart of the matter. The weight of my realizations pressed heavily on my chest, a constant reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows of my ignorance. As I continued to navigate this journey, I became aware of how pervasive the normalization of spiritual fatigue had become in our culture. People, myself included, often wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, dismissing our struggles as mere phases or temporary setbacks. This facade, however, was dangerously misleading. I recalled countless conversations with friends and acquaintances where they would shrug off their weariness with a casual, "I'm just tired," or "it's just a phase." These phrases, so innocuous in nature, were deceptive. They belied the deeper spiritual fatigue that was silently eroding their peace and clarity. The more I listened, the more I recognized a troubling pattern. In our rush to appear strong and unaffected, we overlooked the very signs that warned us of impending chaos. Spiritual adversaries thrive in complacency. They take advantage of our tendency to dismiss fatigue as a natural part of life. I began to understand that this normalization was a tactic designed to keep us blind to the vulnerabilities within ourselves. Whenever someone would say, "I'm okay," while their eyes told a different story, I realized those words acted as a shield, obscuring the truth that lay beneath. As I unraveled these insights, a sense of urgency began to build within me. The truth was far too crucial to remain unspoken, buried beneath layers of denial. In my quest for clarity, I also turned inward, seeking to understand how spiritual attacks operated within this environment of ignorance. I'd always thought that these forces were overt, something that would manifest dramatically in my life. But now, I saw the subtler, more insidious ways they crept in, through complacency, distraction, and denial. Each moment spent ignoring the signs was another moment surrendered to the darkness. During a particularly introspective evening, I found myself reflecting on the times I had set aside prayer or meditation, convincing myself that I would return to it when life slowed down. Ironically, it was during those very moments of distraction that the attacks would flourish. I learned that when we neglect to communicate with God, we are, in essence, leaving our spiritual doors wide open. Each missed prayer was an unguarded moment, an opportunity for chaos to seep back into my life. The revelation ignited a fire within me. I became increasingly passionate about encouraging others to recognize the importance of maintaining their spiritual health. I began organizing small gatherings, inviting friends to share their struggles, creating a space where vulnerability was cherished rather than shunned. We discussed the weight of unspoken fatigue, the importance of acknowledging our emotional states, and the need for intentional communication with God. As these discussions unfolded, I observed an interesting phenomenon. Many were surprised to find that their experiences echoed those of others. They weren't alone in their struggles. There was a collective understanding that formed in those moments of honesty. It was liberating, and I felt the power of shared truth begin to break the chains of complacency that had bound us. However, with this newfound clarity came a stark realization about the nature of spiritual authority. I began to understand that many individuals, myself included, often approached God with requests rather than declarations. We prayed in hopes of receiving guidance or relief, but rarely did we assert our authority over the chaos encroaching on our lives. This was a key distinction that shifted my perspective. I had been seeking permission to reclaim my peace instead of boldly declaring it. As I navigated this path, I reminded myself that silence in spiritual matters often equated to agreement. The absence of a declaration was, in effect, an implicit acceptance of whatever chaos had come to claim a foothold in my life. This realization was pivotal. It marked a turning point in my understanding of how to communicate with God and assert my spiritual authority. I began to practice declarations aloud, affirming my rights as a child of God. I declare peace over my life, I would say, feeling the weight of those words punctuate the atmosphere around me. In these moments, I not only reclaimed my authority, but also acknowledged the power of my voice in the spiritual realm. It wasn't merely about what I hoped for, it was about what I knew I deserved. As I shared these insights with those around me, I noticed a palpable shift. There was an awakening, a realization that we could take an active role in our spiritual well-being. No longer would we be mere spectators in our lives, waiting for change to manifest outside of us. Instead, we had the ability to influence our reality through our declarations and awareness. Yet, even as I felt empowered, a lingering question nagged at the back of my mind. How many of us were still unaware of the deeper battles being waged? How many were still living in complacency, allowing the darkness to seep in unnoticed? This concern propelled me forward, fueling my desire to reach more people, to awaken them to the realities they had been ignoring. I began crafting messages, both spoken and written, aimed at drawing out the truth from those who felt lost in their struggles. I wanted them to know that they were not alone, and that their feelings were valid. The normalization of fatigue was a collective illusion that needed to be shattered, one conversation at a time. As I stood before my friends at our next gathering, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. This was an opportunity to share not just my journey, but also the wisdom I had uncovered. I realized that it wasn't just about my story. It was about sparking a movement of awareness and empowerment. I encouraged them to declare their truths out loud, to recognize their authority, and to understand the importance of staying vigilant against the forces that sought to undermine their peace. Together we can shift the narrative, I proclaimed, the conviction of my words echoing in the room. We can reclaim our lives from the chaos by acknowledging our emotional states and asserting our spiritual authority. This is not just a battle for ourselves, it's a battle for our collective well-being. In that moment, I felt a surge of hope. It was a reminder that even in the face of darkness, the light of understanding could illuminate the path forward. As my friends nodded in agreement, I sensed we were on the precipice of something transformative. With hearts aligned, we stood together, ready to challenge the complacency that had bound us for far too long. And as we prepared to embark on this journey of reclamation, I couldn't help but wonder what revelations awaited us next. The stakes were high, but so was the promise of freedom that lay ahead. The realization that silence in the spiritual realm could be interpreted as consent to chaos was a revelation that hit me like a thunderclap. I had been navigating a treacherous landscape, and the absence of vocal declarations in my spiritual life had left me vulnerable to an onslaught of chaos. This newfound understanding ignited an urgency within me, a burning desire to reclaim my voice and assert my spiritual authority. In my past, I had often approached my prayers as if they were mere requests for assistance, a polite knocking on heaven's door. But now, it dawned on me that I needed to take a stand, to proclaim boldly what was rightfully mine. The very act of declaring my faith out loud would serve as a barrier against the encroaching darkness. I began to reflect on the power of words, how they could manifest not just thoughts but realities. My silence had been a tacit agreement to allow chaos to take root in my life, and I was done with that. As I delved deeper into this understanding, I reached out to those friends who had shared their own struggles with spiritual fatigue. I wanted to create a space where we could explore this concept together. I invited them to a gathering, one fueled by honesty and the shared intent to break free from complacency. That night, as we sat in a circle, a palpable energy filled the room, a collective yearning for clarity and empowerment. I began by articulating my realization about the dangers of silence. When we don't speak up, I said, we are giving permission for chaos to invade our lives. It's not just about what we say to God, it's about how we align our words with our intentions. The air thickened with the weight of our shared understanding. Eyes widened, and nods of agreement rippled through the group. Each person felt the gravity of this truth, and we recognized that we were not merely passive participants in our spiritual journeys. We were active players with the authority to shape our experiences. As I shared my journey, I noticed that my friends were also uncovering their own layers of complacency. They began to recount moments when they had felt spiritually powerless, times they had defaulted to silence instead of declaration. Each story added depth to our conversation, creating a tapestry of shared struggle and revelation. It was a reminder that we were all navigating similar battles, oftentimes in isolation, fearing that our vulnerabilities would be seen as weaknesses. Throughout the evening, we began to practice vocalizing our intentions. One by one, people declared what they wanted to see manifest in their lives. "I am free from the weight of fear," one friend asserted. "I reclaim my joy," another declared with newfound conviction. With each declaration, the atmosphere shifted, becoming charged with an electric sense of empowerment. We were no longer just speaking into the void. We were taking control of our narratives, reclaiming the spiritual authority that was our birthright. However, amidst this exhilaration, I felt a nagging sense of apprehension about a deeper lesson yet to be revealed. I sensed that while we were shattering the chains of silence, there lay another critical error that needed addressing, the most detrimental misstep in the face of spiritual chaos. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface, that the conversation was far from over. That night, as I prepared to leave the gathering, I felt a soft whisper in my spirit. an urging to reveal the final piece of the puzzle, the one that had the potential to dismantle the very foundations of chaos in our lives. I understood that we must confront not only our silence, but also the profound misconception about the nature of authority itself. Silence, I realized, is not just an absence of sound. It is an invitation for chaos to take the lead. We had covered the importance of vocal declarations, but now we needed to explore how to align our faith with our actions. Our words were powerful, but they required the backing of unwavering belief and consistent action to truly manifest change. As I reflected on this, I couldn't help but think of the many times I had engaged in spiritual practices without the conviction they demanded. It was one thing to declare my freedom from chaos. It was another to live as if I truly believed it. This disconnect was a chasm that needed bridging. The following week, I decided to deepen our conversations with a new focus. I organized another gathering, this time emphasizing the importance of alignment, how our actions must reflect our declarations. As I stood before my friends, I reiterated, it's not enough to declare our intentions. We must embody them. Our faith needs to be active, evidenced through our choices and behaviors. This revelation sent ripples of contemplation through the room. We began brainstorming ways to manifest our declarations in our daily lives. What does it look like to walk in freedom? I asked, and the room buzzed with ideas. We discussed practical steps, engaging in daily affirmations, seeking accountability partners, and actively participating in community worship. This was not just talk. It was a call to action, a challenge to take ownership of our spiritual journeys. As we wrapped up the evening, I felt a sense of anticipation building within me. We were on the brink of uncovering the final error, the last obstacle that could derail our progress. I could sense that the final piece of the puzzle was within reach, and the weight of that knowledge felt both exhilarating and daunting. The path ahead was becoming clearer, but it was evident that the journey was far from over. Each revelation was a stepping stone towards understanding the intricacies of spiritual authority, and I was determined to guide myself and my friends through the final threshold into complete empowerment. With each passing day, I carried these lessons like a beacon in the darkness, awaiting the moment when we would confront the ultimate truth, the error that could unravel our progress and plunge us back into chaos if we were not vigilant. The stakes had never been higher, and I was resolved to ensure that our voices would not fall silent again. The journey had transformed me, and now I was ready to face whatever lay ahead with unwavering faith and a declaration of authority that would echo through the halls of my spiritual life. As the gathering came to a close, I felt an undeniable shift within myself and the group. We had unearthed the power of our voices, but there was still an unfinished symphony echoing in my spirit. The realization that silence could invite chaos had opened our eyes, yet the deeper lesson about authority loomed larger than ever. It was time to address this head-on, to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. Listen closely, I began, drawing everyone's attention once more. We've talked about the importance of speaking up, but there's another layer we must peel back. It's not just about what we say, it's about the authority behind our words. Authority is the lifeblood of our declarations. Without it, our words can fall flat, powerless against the chaos we seek to repel. The room was silent, hanging on my every word. I could see the wheels turning in my friends' minds as they processed this new information. What do I mean by authority? I continued. It's the understanding that we are not merely asking for help. We are declaring our rightful position as heirs of spiritual power. When we speak, we must do so with the confidence that we are invoking a force that is greater than ourselves. I felt a wave of energy surge through me as I spoke, fueled by the collective curiosity of my friends. Consider this. When we declare our intentions, we are not just voicing our desires, we are aligning ourselves with a divine truth. We are asserting that we have the power to shape our reality. This is where the real strength lies. A friend, Sarah, leaned in, her eyes bright with understanding. So, it's about believing that we have that power? That we deserve it? Exactly, I affirmed. But it goes deeper. It's about recognizing that our words are not just vibrations in the air, they carry weight in the spiritual realm. When we declare, "I am free from fear," we are not simply stating a wish, we are making a proclamation that disrupts the very fabric of chaos. As I spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if a gust of wind had swept through, clearing the cobwebs of doubt and fear that had previously clouded our minds. My friends began to nod in agreement, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to empowerment. "Let's practice this together," I said, feeling the momentum building. "Let's declare our authority in unison. When we speak together, our collective voice amplifies our power." We formed a circle once again, hands linked, and I led the way. "Repeat after me. I stand firm in my authority. I refuse to be a victim of chaos." The sound of our voices filled the room, growing stronger with each repetition. "I declare freedom over my life. I reclaim my joy. I am a warrior of light." The energy was palpable, a tangible force that seemed to reverberate off the walls. I could see the transformation happening in real time, each person shedding layers of doubt and fear, stepping into their rightful place as empowered individuals. But as we reached the climax of our declarations, I felt a sudden stillness wash over me. It was a reminder that while we had made significant strides, a deeper understanding awaited us. "Before we conclude, I want to emphasize one last point," I said, my voice steady. "The chaos we face is relentless. It will attempt to return, to weave itself back into our lives. We must remain vigilant. Our declarations are powerful, but they require consistent alignment with our actions." "What do you mean?" another friend asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "It means we cannot just speak our truth. We must live it. Our actions must reflect our declarations. If we say we are free from fear, we must confront situations that challenge that fear. If we claim joy, we must create spaces for joy in our lives. It's about a continuous commitment to our declarations, not just a one-time event." The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see the understanding settle in. We were not just engaging in a moment of empowerment, we were committing to a lifestyle of spiritual authority. As we concluded our gathering, I felt a profound sense of camaraderie among us. We had shared our vulnerabilities, articulated our intentions, and stepped into our power together. It was a collective awakening, a realization that we were not alone in our struggles. "Remember this moment," I said, looking each of my friends in the eye. "We have the authority to shape our lives, to reclaim what is rightfully ours. This is just the beginning. We will face battles, but together, we will rise above them." As we departed, I felt a warmth enveloping me, a confirmation that we had tapped into something profound. The chaos that had once gripped my life was now a distant memory, overshadowed by the strength of our collective declarations. Yet, as I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey was far from over. I knew that the spiritual landscape was fraught with challenges, many of which would attempt to go unnoticed. I would continue to explore these themes, to share insights and empower others to recognize the battles that lay beneath the surface. In the distance, I could see the first rays of dawn breaking through the night sky. It was a new beginning, a promise of hope and renewal. As I reflected on our gathering, I felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. The battle against chaos was ongoing, but armed with our voices and our newfound authority, we were ready to face whatever came next. In the end, I realized that chaos could not be eradicated, but it could be managed through vigilance, declaration, and community. We were warriors of light, standing together against the darkness, and I was excited to continue this journey with my friends by my side. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and as I embraced the dawn of a new day, I understood that the fight for spiritual clarity and authority was just beginning.